Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development CropTalk webinar. If you have any questions during this presentation today, please type them into the question section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 25th edition of CropTalk. And we had a week off last week as a lot of guys were harvesting and getting some crop in the bin. And then we're lucky enough to get some rain over the past week, I guess it's been now. And there's some different amounts throughout the province. We'll be talking a bit about that, but for today, I thought it would be a good idea to look at our soybean crop. It's gone through a lot of different stages this year. It was managing things well, and then we got a lot of heat, and now we got some rain that might bring it back here. So I thought it'd be good to get Dennis Lang to come on and give us an update on the soybean crop and also the edible bean crop, hearing some things with that crop as well. And then we'll turn it over to the crop scouting panel where we've been getting some questions, and with the weather changes here, some questions coming in as well. So I thought it'd be good to bring them on and get some of the questions answered. I guess talked a little bit about the rainfall we got, and over the last 7 days, you can see that I would say pretty much the majority of the province received something. Some areas definitely more than others, but it definitely was rainfall that was needed, whether it's going to help for this year or going to be definitely an asset for next year. And kind of the stretch that showed the most moisture is kind of from the southwest corner up through to probably that Nipawai area, and then in through a bit through the Interlake, and even thank God the Interlake got some rain. I was hearing some reports of a couple inches or so up in that country as well. So good to hear that, and hopefully, if anything, it might extend a little bit of our grazing season, especially help out maybe some of our fall pasture areas, or maybe help keep some of the grass green. Probably anything that was overgrazed or had a lot of pressure on it is probably shut down for the year already. But if anything, it might give us some other areas to graze and keep going. Just a chart showing where we are right now in harvest, and you look through the regions throughout the province, pretty much a little bit of variance, 22% in the southwest, but that's usually where we're behind the eastern part of the province, just because of the time the crop goes in and how the crop matures. So the southwest and northwest side of the province are right around that 20 to 22%, with the majority of it being cereal crops that have been harvested and our pulse crops, our field peas that have been coming off. So you look at that and you get to the eastern side in the Interlake, we're anywhere from that 40 to 40% complete. So probably maybe a little bit earlier than normal, but that was due to the hot, dry conditions. And I guess we'll see over the next week here as we get some more rainfall. We're probably going to see those percentages not change a whole lot until probably next week, as a lot of producers are talking that it's going to take some time to dry down the crop. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to Dennis, and we'll get into our soybean and edible bean update, and take it away, Dennis.
Alrighty, so let us go full screen here, and with a little bit of patience here, get back up. There we go. Alrighty, so Lionel asked me to say a few comments, I guess, on the soybean and dry beans in Manitoba. So Monday afternoon, I took a bit of a road trip and made a few stops at some of our different variety trials and a few fields as well, and took a few pictures. And this is kind of going to be a review of kind of what I saw while I was traveling this week here. So, oops, got that again here. There we go. Being a little bit too quick on the clicker here. So, I'm going to just give you a bit of background on. So we'll start with soybeans here. You can see here this year in the green, we're going to be somewhere around 1.3 million acres of soybeans. Final numbers haven't come in, but the estimates are showing that we're going to be somewhere in that ballpark. So it's an increase from last year, and last year we were just over 1 million acres, as you can see here. I'm just going to go to a laser pointer here and pointer options. Nope. And so for the most part, that was kind of what we were expecting early in the season, you know, just with increased prices and with rotation concerns that growers were kind of moving them back into soybeans a little bit again this year. To give everybody a bit of an idea where our averages are at, so our 5-year average, we're sitting at 35, and our 10-year average in Manitoba, we're also sitting at 35. So just it'll kind of frame the talk or the discussion for today. On the dry bean side of things, we, you know, initially we're projecting somewhere around 153,000 acres for dry beans in Manitoba, which is down from the 190,000 we had last year. It looks though that with some of the numbers coming in from preliminary numbers from MAST as far as seeded acres go, we're going to be probably pretty close to that number from last year. So that was a real positive. Growers were interested in growing dry beans again this year. And we'll talk a little bit about what my yield estimates are at the end of the presentation, but just to kind of frame where we're at with dry beans. And a couple other things you'll see here, just to point out here. 2019, we had quite a drop in yield. We were around 1,200 pounds across all dry bean types. And as you all remember, we had a very dry summer in 19, and then a very wet September. And so there were lots of poor quality, some poor quality beans that, and some beans that didn't get harvested that fall that got destroyed. So those yields are lower, but normally what we have been seeing is with the reduced acres from what we saw back in the early 2000s, where we were over 300,000, we've come to a point now with the dry bean industry that growers are really focused on variety select or on field selection, where they're putting dry beans and really putting it on soil that can take the excess moisture. The beans can take the excess moisture onto a little sandier soil, and also too just really kind of focusing on keeping those beans on fields that will give the best performance for those beans. So moving on here. So let's go into the soybeans, and I'm going to kind of start down in my area here. This is actually very close to my farm here. One of the big things that we're seeing this year is with all the salts, you know, that are close to the soil surface in the areas that's more stressed, a lot of fields are showing this brown, and you know, the plants are prematurely dying off. And I have another shot of this a little bit later from another area here, but there are some of those pockets where part of the field, there really won't be much yield out of those. Kind of salt-induced maturity, if you want to call it that. Things start drying down a little quicker. The plant is, because we haven't had rainfall until just recently here, those plants are kind of running out of moisture, and the salts are really starting to affect it here. But this particular field here is probably a mid-season line here. And we're still looking at, you know, kind of the R6 growth stage yet. Haven't quite hit R7 yet. Moving on. This is a longer season variety down in the Emerson area here. This one here, I just happened to put up a Tennessee Winkler. Very good piece of ground. The difference between the first two pictures is the amount of moisture that this has had, and also the variety. Tennessee Winkler is a longer season variety. That area is only about 3 miles apart from the previous slide, but they've captured more rainfall earlier in the season, and it's sure showing it. You're seeing better pod development. You're also seeing overall greener appearance of the crop at this stage of the game, because we're still in August yet. We're kind of the, you know, last week of August. So I am expecting some good numbers off of this field here. It's just it's a very strong field in the area. Plus, again, any kind of moisture that we've had this year, it's captured it, and even though it's only 3 miles apart. Now this is an earlier season line in the Emerson area here as well. I put this as, you know, this is a Y4 variety here. This is starting to mature off as well. We're starting to see some brown pod in there. The leaves are starting to yellow, and over the next week, we're really going to see a dramatic change in that. To look a bit more forward or closer into the canopy here, you can start to see some brown pods already start to show up here. Lots of yellow leaves as well, and definitely into the R7 stage here in this particular field here as well. So things are moving along. The pod set is actually reasonable. We're seeing, 2 to 3 seeds per pod, anywhere from 10 to 15 pods per plant. Stands are relatively even, and I think that's a good thing. So looking for some positives there, even though this field has not seen a lot of moisture all season. The soybeans have really been digging down. Now, this particular field was on oats, or was on wheat ground last year with a fair amount of stubble. It was worked in the fall, but keeping that moisture this spring seemed to really help keep these plants alive quite a bit longer, and just to hold on for some of the rains we did get later in the season. Moving over to another area here, was out to Carmen in my drive here, and was quite pleased that some of the fields I saw out in the Carmen area here. Again, here we're kind of in the R6 growth stage here. When we zoom in a bit here, we see a reasonable pod set. Again, 2 to 3 beans per pod. Still got a little ways to go yet, but that's okay for this time of the year. That just tells me that this field does have a bit of yield potential left to really work with there too. So I'm kind of looking forward to see how some of these fields perform in the fall. Then we pop over to our variety trial here at the Carmen Manitoba Pulse and Soybean variety site. And this time of the year is the start of maturity ratings. So I figured I would head out there and see how things are progressing. At the Carmen site, it's considered one of our core sites, which means in the east, we test all the varieties from the earliest to latest maturing. And we go out on a every 2 days once maturity starts, once we hit kind of the R7 stage, and we rate each plot. The ultimate goal is to hit 95% brown pod, and that's the information that you see in the guide. And with 95% brown pod, the leaves have pretty much dropped or have dropped off. The pods themselves are mature. The pods will, the seeds will rattle within the pod. And once you hit that stage, which is what we report in the seed guide, you have anywhere from 10 to 14 days to harvest after that. That's how long the moisture takes to come down to the acceptable level of about 14%. Moving on here. Okay, so one of our earliest lines that we had at the Carmen site here, you can see here, it's still kind of in yellow pod yet. There are some, it is starting to, the leaves are starting to drop and yellow off. And you can see here, though, no real brown pods yet, but some yellow pods starting to show up. But these things change quite quickly at this time of the year. Even with the moisture that the foggy days that we had this morning, I would expect this variety to, hit 95 brown pod probably early next week. Then I kind of, from Carmen, I headed towards the Roland area, and this was an interesting field, more so because on one side of the road, we saw a field that is definitely into R7 stage with some brown pod. And when we flip over here, a couple of things you notice here. You see a pod here that's really started to yellow off and almost not quite brown here in this particular instance here. But this is something that we might see this year. Some of these pods here, these ones aren't going to fill. They were just didn't hit that moisture quite at the right time. So they're starting to dry off already. So in some areas where the moisture came a little bit too late, we might see some reduced yield, or we will see some reduced yield in those areas. Even though there's a good pod set, there's some of the potential we lost earlier because it was just too dry for so long. But what's also interesting about this is right across the road, a mid-season variety, and you can see how much of a difference between going for an early season versus a mid-season variety. This happens to be one of the varieties that we're using for a check this year in our Eastern trials. It's DKB 00-52. It's an extend variety. You can see when we zoom into the pods that there's still some flat pods still showing up yet. So this rain that we've had recently will actually help with some of these pods and help them fill. The majority of the pods have formed already. You're not going to form any new pods, but what's there will fill. So that's that moisture there, I think, will allow us for some plumper beans come fall time. And from there, I headed off over to the Morris MPSG Roundup Ready and the soybean site in Morris, Manitoba. Morris did have a few challenges early in the season. Some uneven emergence just because how dry the soil was at the time here. But this is the Roundup Ready site here, and just standing at the corner and looking across here, things still looks pretty green yet. So we didn't do any maturity ratings. However, I did go and find a couple of lines. There were 2 lines actually and that seems to be pretty consistent with some of the other sites I've been to. These are probably the most early, or these are the earliest lines that we've seen. One is on the left here, you'll see NSC Dauphin, and on the right here, you'll see another variety here. This is from Brett Young. It's a D1701-12. Those are probably the two most advanced varieties in our trials here. Still not quite at brown pod yet, and with these ones, I would probably rate them anywhere from 30 to 50% yellow pod, meaning that the leaves are starting to turn yellow. The pods are yellow within the canopy, but we still got a little ways to go before we hit brown pod. Okay. I was fortunate enough that some of my colleagues were able to send me a few photos from different parts of Manitoba, because the Swan River drive would have been a bit of a drive on Monday afternoon to get there and back in reasonable time. So Nicole Clausen, who works with me on the pulses out in the Swan River area, sent me a few pictures of the soybeans out in her area as well. And you can see here they're probably a little bit further behind than where some of the lines are here. These would normally be early to mid-season at the latest, but mostly early season lines. So here we're kind of in that early R6 stage, maybe late R5, 5.5, somewhere in there. Still got a little ways to go yet. So Lionel had mentioned frost earlier in our pre-discussion here. So hopefully we're not going to get anything at this stage here. This could be you would still see a bit of a yield loss in here if there was some frost, but I think once you get through tonight, I think the risk of frost is minimal. So, but you can see here with this stand here, they still got a bit of ways to go yet. Not expecting, the yield potential looks really good. They have gotten some range through the summer, so I'm expecting some good numbers on the varieties that they're growing up there. Okay, I'm just gonna get rid of this pointer here for a moment here. There we go. Okay. Terry Buss, my colleague out in Beausejour, sent me some, he called me last week and says, oh, I need the information for to do the ratings. So I need my sheets, and because some of our varieties are starting to change already. And you can see here within the landscape photo here that there are some lines that are kind of very similar to what we've shown in previous slides here that are just starting to yellow off now. Leaves are starting to drop. They have captured a few rains, and after chatting with Terry here, he is expecting some better numbers up in that Beausejour area than maybe what we're going to see down in the southern part of Manitoba. We're probably going to see some 35, 40 bushel yields up in that area there as well. So yeah, we're kind of looking forward to see what we're gonna find out there. Amir Farouk, a colleague of mine from Hamiota, works with me on the pulse side, will be sent me some photos as well. And you can see here good seed development within the pod as well, 3 and 4s from what he's saying there. Again, they probably captured some rainfall, a bit of a yellow area through here as well, probably just a stressed area here, but overall the crop is looking all right in that area. Now, yesterday we headed up to Stonewall, and I'd mentioned this earlier about the salts affecting the crop. You can see here, this was a really stressed area of the field here, of this particular soybean field. In the background here, you can see that the field is in the R7 growth stage here, but in the foreground, you'll see all these plants here that are starting to, I guess brown off is probably the correct term to use in this case here, but not a natural dry down. Again, the salts have really affected it in here, and you can see by the kochia plants are in the field as well that that's a pretty stressed area here. So these aren't huge areas in the field from where I've seen, but it will affect overall yield because you're losing part of that area. So again, not really a whole lot you can do with this, other than the fact that, if we had rains throughout the season, a lot of these salts may have washed down a bit more and you wouldn't see these things more pronounced. I do have a field near Altona actually that on super dry years, when it's in soybeans, this year it happens to be canola, that the whole field can kind of look like this, just because there just seems to be that salt-induced stress that really shows up. Okay, so if you flip over a little bit, and this is one that I've had a couple calls on, and I've talked about maybe average yields or below average yields this year. The southern part of Manitoba, southern edible bean growing area, kind of Winkler, Carmen area, definitely will have some more stressed fields and reduced yields in those areas because it was just too dry, even for dry beans. But we started off here at my trek here at the Carmen sites, and at Carmen, where we have the Roundup Ready soybeans, we also have dry beans there as well. And you can see here, this is the background shot here of our dry bean trials here. And but there is a field of dry beans around it as well. And the pot set seems to be fairly good. We're seeing 3 to 4 beans per pot, so maybe a few less seeds in that than what we would normally see. But the seed size looks reasonable for the given year. And again, this area has maybe captured a few of those extra rains because our plots look quite good there as well. So talking to one of the locals there, he said, yeah, that area had captured a bit more rain. So yields are going to be variable, just all depends on when the rain hit this year. And we'll just advance here. There we go. So this is another field of black beans, east of Altona, kind of halfway between Altona and Emerson. I didn't really call them Murray. And at that area, this field has been in black beans in the past. It's kind of on my way to work in the morning. So I kind of keep an eye on when this field is in black beans. This field looks fairly good, actually. The pot set is really good. We're seeing, anywhere from, it's almost like in this one here, probably like 5 seeds per pod. The seed quality looks good. Of course, it's a black bean. And we're still in those later stages, but with dry beans, they can stay this, they can dry down, but they don't dry down quite the same way as what soybeans do. So if this was a soybean field, I could say probably by next week, it would pretty much all be ripe. Whereas a dry bean, this could take a couple weeks yet before everything's ready to harvest, or before it's getting close to harvest, I guess. So. And another light red kidney field here. This is where, in some of those drier regions here that didn't get that rainfall when they needed it here, you can see here how stressed some of those areas are. Now, this is a light red kidney field. The seed size looks reasonable, color looks good. Again, this is an earlier bean type. So the yield potential here, we're not going to see 2,000 pounds per acre. That's just a given. But a field like this would probably be in that 1,200 to 1,300 pound range. They are missing a few areas here as well, and thinner stands because of all the winds that we had this spring. And that's on that lighter soil that have all those really strong winds. That really beat up the plants, and in some cases removed a number of plants from the field. And I have another shot of a different field here in a moment that I'll talk about. And again, this is one of those fields here that originally had very high plant population, or a lot of seeds planted. They planted over almost 140 seeds per acre. And then in mid-June, when we had that windstorm, it actually took out quite a number of the plants. And as you can see here, there's lots of gaps between. So we ended up with somewhere around that 50 to 60,000 plants per acre. So the plants that are there look all right, but I'm afraid in some of these instances here, and there's going to be a number of those fields that through the season that because of the combination of the reduced stands, because of all the wind that we had, plus the reduced amount of moisture, that those yields definitely will probably be in that 1,000 pound or even less range. So we'll see, and it will make harvesting a little bit more challenging with dry beans, just because the pods, as you can see here, pretty much touch the ground. So it makes it a little bit more challenging to try to get those pods with the flex header. Plus, there's not enough material there sometimes to really kind of feed nicely. So it could present a few harvest challenges, but in some instances with a field like this being planted or having that windstorm so late hit it, that what ended up happening was there's really no opportunity to replant, especially when you're looking at mid-June. In that instance, then you're better off just leaving it and taking what you get. I have seen some fields this year that were replanted kind of in that June 12th, June 13th range, and were replanted into the same field. So now they're dealing with variations in maturity, and we'll see how that's all going to work out in the end, whether that's going to present some real challenges on desiccation timing, and because you have some plants that might be fully mature, and then some plants that might be a little bit too early to spray yet. So yield projections for 2021. So start with soybeans. Again, some of the things I've mentioned, rainfall is very dependent this year and how that yield is going to be. So right now I'm going to say anywhere from 20 to 40 bushels. So that's a pretty big range. And again, a lot will just depend on capturing some of those rains at the correct time. So that would be end of July, early August. And that's typically when you get the most bang for your buck with moisture. I did have a quick look at the previous year's yields, and you can see here, we're probably going to average somewhere between 25 and 30. 2016, very wet year, and that moisture, lots of moisture in July and August, and that was our provincial record, 42 bushels per acre, and that was the record for all time for Manitoba soybeans. Then we went into 2017, really super dry summer again, and our yields dropped. 2018 dropped a little bit because we saw a dry year. 2019, 27 bushels per acre. Again, dry year plus a very wet fall combined. And so then we saw that drop in acres for 2020, but we had better moisture last year. So that brings us to 38 bushels per acre. So based on kind of what I've seen so far this year, and for the most part, the beans are looking all right, I guess we'll say. It's not like going to be a bumper crop by any means, but there is some potential in some of the fields that I've seen that could do in that 40 bushel range. A lot will depend now on as we talked about earlier, potential frost issues that may arise, and that could also affect quality. But for now, we're just going to move ahead, and things are moving ahead quite nicely. And that's kind of where I see the soybean yields for this year. Dry bean yields, just to give you a bit of background. Again, yields will be variable, kind of like in the soybeans this year, maybe even more so because of all the wind damage that we had in spring and reduced plant stands. So that range is going to be anywhere from 800 to 1,800 pounds across the various classes of bean types that we grow in Manitoba. In the south, we're probably going to be a little closer to that 800 to 1,200 pound range. Again, just because even some of the plants that are there, the pod set is maybe as good as, from what I'm hearing from growers, as what they would hope for. And with that, when you have reduced pod set and reduced number of seeds in the pod, that's going to affect your yield. Those challenges with strong winds in spring that really sheared off some of the plants and reduced your stand is going to be a real something that will contribute to the reduced yield, as well as the lack of rainfall at the critical times this year. So the rain now is great for helping to build up reserves. We still got a little ways to go yet, and it will help with seed size. But as far as yield goes, it really won't help those long season dry beans and soybeans, unless the variety is a long season and is still filling at this time. So if you look back on dry bean yields, with the exception of 2019 where we had a reduced yield, since 2017 to 2020, our yields have averaged anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 pounds over those years. 2016 was a super wet summer. And even though the soybeans like that, the dry beans didn't much so like it. And we had just over 1,600 pounds over average over all types. And then from 2017, just to give you a comparison, and this is not the year, this is actually the average of all the different bean types that we had in 2017, 2,023 pounds per acre. So so when I talk average yields, I guess I'm thinking more in the 1,600 pound range. So in the end, I'm thinking we're probably going to be somewhere around that, across the board over all different areas. I didn't get into the tree heron area and portage area, which looks a little better. But I'm thinking we're probably going to be somewhere in that 1,200 to maybe 1,400 pound range over all bean types, with some areas doing much better. So with that being said, that finishes off my presentation for today, and I open it up for any questions that you may have.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. There's been a couple of questions that have come in. One question is, haven't grown soybeans before, planning on next year. What is your recommendation for fall preparation?
Well, I guess one of the first things I would do if you've never grown soybeans before, the first thing I would do is get a soil test done, find out what your nutrient level is, and also ask for carbonates and salts as well. That will give you an indication of whether or not or which variety you should choose. If you go to the Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Grower website, there is a soybean fertility fact sheet that's listed there, and on that fact sheet it talks about carbonates and salts. So if your carbonates and salts are quite high, you want to choose a variety from the seed guide that has that's considered tolerant. That would be one of the first steps. Next thing is look at your herbicide regime from this year. Make sure that there is no chemistries that you apply to whatever crop you're putting on this year that's going to affect the soybeans this year. That was one of the concerns this year that we've seen in various crops, especially in peas. But it's something that you need to really pay attention to if you're using Everest, for example, if there's any concerns going into soybeans next year or any other products that you need to be concerned with. And then I guess in the end, if it's a new field of soybeans, definitely for next year, one of the things to really kind of keep in mind is plan to use double inoculation. So going liquid on seed and then some type of in-furrow, whether that's another liquid or a granular in-furrow, because you need the two different, I guess, sources of inoculate. So you need one on seed and you need one in-furrow. So those are some of the first things that I would really kind of look at. And something else, just if you've had any history of other Roundup Ready crops, like let's say canola on there, you may want to plan for some alternatives for weed control besides just the Roundup, or if you have any weed resistance issues, like resistant kochia in that field to glyphosate, you need to plan for some alternatives in that field. So those are some of the quick points that I have on that one.
Okay. You mentioned that you're seeing a lot of 2 and 3 beans per pod. What would you say is the average?
Well, when you look at the, if you look at the Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Grower yield harvest, your yield estimator, I think they use about 2.3 as an average. So, you know, I know you always see these 4 and 5 bean posts on Twitter, but typically, you know, 2 to 3 is pretty common. So on soybeans.
Okay, and this one's from me. What do you think? Is there any value, or would it make sense to look at soybean straw for baling up?
I guess part of the concern, I guess, is I know I've looked at this a little bit in season where growers have looked at that as a forage value, and that's usually at the R6 stage if you're doing it before the crop is harvested. After the crop is harvested, there's still some residue left, but it might be a little bit more challenging to pick it up. That's the biggest challenge I have, because sometimes those straw breaks down. So if you are looking at it as a forage replacement, so let's say your yield potential isn't there, you'd call crop insurance and they do an adjustment on it. And I won't get into all the details because I'll leave that to them. But as far as the staging goes, for forage value, the best forage value is kind of at that R6 growth stage.
Okay, and just to refresh us, the R6 stage would be?
Yeah, the R6 stage is when you're counting down from the top of the plant, you want a full seed anywhere in the top 4 nodes. And that full seed meaning that it fills the pod cavity. So. Okay,
great. Thanks, Dennis. I don't have any more questions yet, but you're hanging on for a few minutes, are you? Or?
Yeah, I will be. I will be.
Okay, good. So with that, Lori, if you could hand the screen over to me, we'll get into the crop scouting panel and get some questions answered. Okay. There's our crop scouting panel, and I'm sure everybody's knows these people, so we'll get right into the questions. And one of the things that has been talked about for the last little while here, and last couple of years, I should say, anyways, is Verticillium Wilt showing up in canola. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity as we're doing our canola surveys to see if we can get Dave Kaminsky to maybe give us a little update on Verticillium Wilt, what to look for, and what does it look like.
Okay, thanks, Lionel. I've put together a few slides, so if Lori can hook me up, I will share my screen. Anything happening there?
You can see your screen. You just need to go to full screen now.
Right, okay, good. As always, computer's a little bit slow today.
Yeah,
So yes, Lionel, sorry?
Looks good.
Okay, good. Yeah, Lionel asked me to talk about Verticillium Stripe, especially distinguishing it from blackleg, because there can be quite a bit of overlap in symptoms. Verticillium Stripe is something that until about 3 years ago, we might have been calling Verticillium Wilt. However, we have not yet seen wilt symptoms in Western Canada. They only see that in Scandinavian countries, for instance, where they're growing winter canola. So far, it is something that seems to appear later in the season. And this is one of the very earliest symptoms. You can see the unilateral discoloration on stems and branches. Unilateral meaning one-sided. This could be confused with sun scald, although it varies or alternates from side to side on the plant. If any of you remember back to the early 2000s, we had concern, which was a big concern for a couple of years. That was Fusarium Wilt on one particular variety. That variety was yanked from the market, and we haven't seen Fusarium since, at least not causing a wilt. However, it did have this same unilateral stem discoloration. So the more distinctive and diagnostic symptoms of Verticillium stripe are a diffuse grayish discoloration when you cut through the stems in the same place we would cut the stems to look at blackleg infection. Shredding of the epidermis, that might be a little like what you would see with sclerotinia infection later on. But the main thing is profuse production of tiny structures called microsclerotia. These are survival structures within the pith cavity and underneath the skin or epidermis of the plants. These pictures and slide was actually put together by my predecessor, Holly Dirksen, from 2014, the first year that Verticillium longisporum was detected in Manitoba. There was quite a bit of excitement at the time whether or not this would be a quarantinable disease or one that we needed to take action on. It was soon discovered that it was quite widely distributed and elsewhere in Canada, so they scaled back. But this again shows those symptoms that I've been describing. Now, more recently, these pictures, at least the ones on the left, the comparison from 2020 is on last year's samples. There are 5 plants on the right, which in cross-section have V-shaped or cross the whole stem discoloration, which is quite black, and that is blackleg, whereas the 4 plants on the right have that diffuse grayish discoloration, which is primarily on the interior of the stem. I was surveying just last week, and the field that I was in had about 27% incidence of Verticillium, and this is the range of symptoms that I saw in that field. The RM of Prairie Lakes, if anybody is interested. Although again, this condition, disease, is quite common and widespread across Manitoba. Okay, some more close-up or closer up pictures of 3 stems that Justine Cornelson, agronomist with the Canola Council, collected last year. And the one in the middle here is blackleg, the one on the left is Verticillium, and this one is a clean stem. Again, the microsclerotia of this species of Verticillium are very profuse at times, and this is especially late in the season. Now, we haven't seen a lot of it. This is from another year again, and it's within the pith cavity, within the water conducting vessels, and underneath the epidermis. So they're visible from the outside of the plant. Terry Buss, this was from one of his canola disease survey samples. I think it was taken about a week ago, and this one turned out to be Verticillium Stripe, showing the microsclerotia. They are quite tiny, but they're underneath the skin or the epidermis and within the pith cavity. And there's that diagnostic or characteristic shredding of the outside of the plant. Now, here is a rating scale that we're developing in collaboration with colleagues in Alberta. Justine Cornelson has also been a driver on this, and we only used plus and minus this year in our survey because we are only finding plants in this category, either clean or with some unilateral staining or that grayish internal discoloration upon opening them up. But we may in future, if Verticillium Stripe continues to be a concern, move to this 0 to 4 scale for severity rating. This is a picture that I took just this morning. Some of the plants that I took, I thought might be Verticillium Stripe, but the little black dots are a little bit larger. In this case, they're surrounded by a darker black, purplish black margin. And the thing that I can see under the microscope, perhaps it's not evident in the photograph, is that there's a bit of a pinkish color associated with them. And what that is spores oozing out of these structures, which are not microsclerotia, but pycnidia. And they are the pycnidia of Leptosphaeria biglobosa, which is a related species to blackleg, but sort of benign on the plants. It appears late in the season and does not do much damage. This is a slide prepared by my colleague in Saskatchewan, Dr. Alireza Akavan, and from their 2020 survey, they found blackleg in 78% of their fields, and with an average incidence of 17%. Why am I talking about blackleg? Well, blackleg produces these black pepper dots known as pycnidia. They also ooze pinkish spores. And again, it's something that can be mistaken for Verticillium Stripe at times. How do you distinguish these things? Well, we would urge people to get suspected samples, if you're not a part of the canola disease survey, to PSI lab. Perhaps call them to ask about what they need as far as plant material. And if you are a member of MCGA, I believe they forego the cost of the test to determine whether that is Verticillium or something else. So that's what I had. I didn't take too long. And unless there are questions, I can turn it back to the other folks. How do I stop sharing my screen?
Okay, yeah, we can get my screen back, but we also have a question that has come through, David. What is there any control or is measure for the Verticillium Stripe, or is this something that's just so new that there hasn't been concerns yet?
I have to say that there has been some concern, especially last year and the year before, because of how much there was and the apparent severity. However, no, there are yet no fungicide controls available, nor has it really been researched whether or not fungicides could control this particular problem. I expect that it's something that will be dealt with fairly quickly by breeders, because they have a good handle on canola genetics. And just as they solved the issue with Fusarium Wilt back in the early aughts, I think that's the route that things will go. But never say never, it could be proven wrong. And there might also be ag chem companies that are looking at whether or not their products have an impact on Verticillium Stripe.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. Just
Yep.
a comment on the, I asked David, or Dennis, sorry, about the soybean straw, and one of our former colleagues, Ingrid Christensen, sent me a comment saying that she had maybe done some checking on this, and she said soybean residue is best to be probably gone through either a tub grinder or a bale shredder before feeding. So that's looks like some people have tried to look at that anyways. Next question goes to Anne. How is the rain? How is this rain may affect seed quality? Does bleaching have an effect on seed quality, or is it just visual? Will wetting and drying affect my protein?
Yeah, so the bleaching could have an effect on grading. It would affect the hard vitreous kernel grading. So you know, any non-vitreous material could include having the kernel having a defined you know, white area on the kernel if it clearly contrasts with the translucent color. So I don't think there's been too much concern yet, but if the hard vitreous kernels are less than 70%, so if there's 30% or more that have at least half of the kernel with that bleaching, then it could be downgraded to number 2. I did talk to someone in an elevator this morning, and they said they weren't too worried about many samples being downgraded due to bleaching. And for the protein, I don't think that wetting and drying will affect protein at this stage. Like the protein is what's in the kernel now. Yeah, and we shouldn't see any effect on protein at this stage.
Okay, well, that's good news, and hopefully we get some drier weather so we can get back out into the field and get it off in the best condition we can. So thanks, Anne. Question for Dane. Do I swath my canola or not? It's uneven, and recent rain is going to keep it green for a long time. Right now I have time to swath because we're not harvesting for the next 3 to 4 days. It's a pretty general question, but I just thought I'd get your opinion on what you have seen out there, and maybe some of your comments, Dane.
Sure. That's been a tough kind of question for the past decade or more, especially as we move to straight cut varieties or non-straight cut. I guess the first question would be, is this a straight cut variety, or is it a traditionally swathed canola variety? That makes a big difference. If it's a straight cut variety, I would certainly lean to keeping it standing. The forecast for the Westman area is unstable weather. Winds are supposed to be down, but we're supposed to have 50% chance of rain, I believe, towards the weekend, Friday, Saturday, and again Tuesday, Wednesday next week. But you know how rapidly that can change and may or may not be accurate. Will the canola dry faster if it's lying in the swath, or will it dry and clear chlorophyll better if it's standing up? My preference is to leave it standing wherever possible for a number of reasons. Again, this trends toward being a pod shatter resistant variety. Canola that's standing and still green still has the opportunity to clear chlorophyll out of the seed. Once it's cut, that chlorophyll is either locked in or will not clear nearly as well. Rain on a canola crop does help actually even up maturity, but with the downside of it keeping a little bit greener, a little bit wetter, a little longer. Have the grower look at their field and evaluate what the seed color change is. I mean, is it half the field that's green and grass green, the other part is ripe, or is it only 25%? You have to kind of start weighing those options. Swathing is recommended at about 60% seed color change, 60 to 75%, which is about 2/3 up the main raceme or the main stem. From the bottom up, those seeds have to have at least some color change on them to be considered starting to change. Now, with the weird looking canola we've got this year, we have oftentimes where the main stem is actually completely aborted or has lost all its pods, and it may have thrown a side branch or two that are now acting as the main leader. So look at your main stem, whichever one is carrying the bulk of the yield, that's the one you want to start evaluating. If they're really branchy, you may have to evaluate a couple on the individual canola. That said, making use of labor is very important. Really understand that, but if you're waiting for finishing cereal harvest right now and your canola is still quite green, you've got time. We're in for some unstable weather and perhaps some rain in a couple more days. I would wait until then. because your combine's going to be parked then anyway, and perhaps then you can get on the field and do some swathing, and maybe then the canola has changed a little bit more. Also look at pre-harvest aids. If this is either a pod shatter or a non-pod shatter variety of canola, using a pre-harvest desiccant may be a tool that works well to even up or dry down, not even up really, but dry down portions of the field to make it uniform for harvest. Now, you will give up some yield, certainly, by spraying too early or locking in green seed. Remember that canola is graded number 1 at less than 2% green seed. It can grade a number 2 if it has less than 6% green seed. To do a hand thresh sample too, when you're getting close, and start figuring out what percentage of your canola seed that still remains green and what loss you're willing to take when selling to the elevator.
Okay, I just got a text in here saying that, hi Lionel, do you think the barley will sprout standing up? The canola that got hailed looks all right. The late stuff is filled and firm. How much longer should it be left standing? I'm a little scared about the frost. Maybe if you can make a comment, Dane, about canola and maybe what kind of temperature. I don't think it's going to freeze, but there's been some weather comments about a chance of a frost. Standing canola looking like the picture that's there right now, you know, how much cool or how cool of a temperature can it handle before you need to worry about frost?
Canola can handle about down to -2 for a couple hours at this stage. If you've got firm seed, despite it being green, there is a good chance that it'll make it through a light frost. That's not usually too much of a concern, and we touch the tops. Funny enough, when we get some rain, water acts as an insulating factor, and wet conditions, despite it being cool, do tend to insulate a bit when it comes down to a frost. So if you've got wet soil underneath the canopy, that can help push back against the frost. So -2 for about 2 to 4 hours in that range is about the lower limit for green canola seed. Once you start getting seed color change, that rapidly helps dissipate the chlorophyll, and then frost is much less likely to damage. So keep it standing where you can to try and clear out chlorophyll as much as possible. Cutting it now on the green side will certainly lock in some chlorophyll, and then you're taking a chance on a frost that may not actually arrive or may not be as damaging as originally thought. So it's tough to tell a farmer to wait and see, but wait and see.
Okay, good, Dane. And Anne, I was wondering if you can maybe comment on the barley. A lot of the barley was pretty much bone dry already, and now we got this rain, and I guess he's wondering if it might sprout on him. Any comments there? Okay, I don't think, maybe we lost Anne there, so I will go to the next question. And this will go to John Gavlowski. Cool wet weather has slowed, so I guess this is grasshopper, so cool weather has slowed them down, but are they done for the season yet, or can we still expect them around for a while?
Can you guys hear me now, Lionel?
You bet, John.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, so the grasshoppers, they're cold-blooded creatures, so when it's cooler, their metabolism doesn't work as quick. They do slow down. They don't feed as much. They're not as active. You don't see them jumping as much. When it does warm up, they will be more active. Now, the numbers are gradually declining right now as they start dying off. Grasshoppers aren't producing new grasshoppers late in the season like this, so the numbers are gradually declining right now. Once we do get some frost, especially some hard frost, numbers will really sharply decline. That's when things really end for them. But until that time, you'll have this very gradual decline in numbers. They'll still be around. If we do get some warm weather, we could still start seeing them do some feeding. And right now, I would say what to watch for is the the winter cereals, that once they start coming up in September, you may want to keep an eye on those, especially if we get some hot weather, and just keep an eye on what might be moving in. In this week's crop pest update, we're going to cover a few things you can do if you're seeding winter cereals, things such as maybe adjusting your seeding date a little bit, or seeding a little bit heavier along the field edges if you know you've got lots of grasshoppers outside the field. And again, just keep an eye on what might be moving in when the winter cereals start coming up.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, John. Got a question in here for, I guess I'm going to send this one to John and Marla. Because of the recent rainfall, looks like we're going to be making some tracks and fields again. What should I be doing this fall? Is it best to get rid of them this fall, or should I leave them open for freezing, and does that make compaction worse? I guess just looking at your comments as how to manage these ruts when we get back out into the field.
Well, John's here, but I'm going to let Marla tackle this. She has all the goods on compaction here.
So sorry, I missed the very beginning of this question. So the question was regarding the ruts that are starting to show up because of the rain?
No, just that we've got this rain, and some areas received, 4 to 5 inches. And so the concern was that you're going to be making ruts in the field, and what's the best way to manage those ruts for next year, whether to control them or take care of them this fall, or if you leave them open, does it make it worse if they're open for the winter with all the freezing?
So when dealing with these ruts, so now that we've got some moisture, we are going to be seeing the potential for that compaction happening where the trafficking is actually occurring. So first thing, we want to make sure that we're trying to, I guess, travel the ruts as much as possible rather than making a lot of random ruts across the field. And then depending on where you're at in the province and whether you're in a reduced or no-till system or a full-till system, that might change a little bit on how you're managing those ruts. If it stays wet and we don't have good, I guess, dry down of the soil to be able to break up some of those ruts without causing more compaction problems. Because again, if the risk of compaction is high, we do want to limit as much of the travel as possible across the field. So if we're dealing with wet conditions where we don't dry down, then you might want to wait until you get a bit of freeze up to kind of try to attack them. Helps carry the equipment a little bit and might help to break them down a little bit better. If we don't get a whole lot more rain and we stay a bit drier, then it might not be as difficult to be able to kind of till them up. But again, you just want to lightly travel over them too. You don't want to dig deep in order to try to break these ruts up. Just something that tickles over the soil to fill them in as opposed to trying to rip them all up is probably your best bet. John, any other comments?
No, I think it's better to tickle than till.
Yeah, absolutely. So fill them in as opposed to rip them up is really the way you want to address them.
So like a sulfur would be something you're talking about?
Yeah, something with a shallower depth of tillage, I would say. Now, with a vertical till unit, if you're going in with something that is a little less aggressive, that is probably a better scenario. Recognize that if you have a very aggressive shallow disc unit, that you can be really playing around with the soil structure at the surface a little bit too hard, too much. We do see a lot of issues where people have been using high-speed shallow discs, multiple passes across the field every year in the fall, which preps the soil nicely for making a nice firm seed bed and really kind of pulverizing and breaking up the soil structure at the surface. But it does lead us to a lot of problems in the spring. We've seen a lot of extra blowing in the spring when we are under dry conditions, where that soil prep in the fall with a vertical till unit can actually be quite detrimental because of the loss of soil structure that comes with that type of a unit, because it really does a good job of pulverizing soil. So when we're dealing with a vertical till unit or shallow discs, something like a Salford or those types of units, I like to refer to them or think of them as being residue management tools, especially a true vertical till, something that's not too aggressive. You're chopping and sizing residue more so than you are actually moving soil around. And that's what you want to use those units for. Once they get more aggressive and you start moving more soil, then yeah, something that's a bit more aggressive could help to fill in those ruts. But again, you just want to focus on the ruts. You don't want to be having to go across the entire field with those types of units in that kind of case where you're just trying to manage the ruts.
Lionel, we're a week late on this, but really should have done this plug. We had a focused field day on this last week, and Marla was able to show in the field the benefits of a controlled traffic system where those so-called wheel tracks maintain their density, provide flotation for equipment, and prevent destruction of the soil. And we had some great demonstrations of how water infiltration in non-tracked soil is like, I don't know, about 8 times faster than where there's tracks. So anyways, tell your listeners to stay tuned. Maybe they can watch this by video later.
But yeah, it's really important to just try to focus on filling them in and recognize that another pass to manage these ruts is another pass with a potential for a risk of compaction. So something to keep in the back of the mind.
Okay, I've got a few more questions coming in here. David, this one I think will be for you. It's regarding the Verticillium Stripe, and is there plans for seed companies to develop ratings for varieties moving forward?
I talked about ratings in development, but that is being spearheaded by both the Canola Council and scientists at the University of Alberta primarily. I know that Dr. Fernando at the U of M is also interested in working on that. I have not had direct conversation with the breeding companies about whether they're developing a rating scale. I presume that they would use what is pulled together by the Canola Council and others.
Okay, good. Thanks, David. And Anne, are you back on, or did we lose you?
Anne is not on at the moment.
Okay, good. I will save that question for.
Sorry, I'm back on the line now. Sorry about that. Is there? I did miss the question though.
Another question just came in, and it was question was regarding, I guess, the moisture and falling numbers. I had asked you about the protein, and I guess one came in and it was asking about falling numbers and the rain that we've got. So is that going to affect falling numbers?
Yeah, it could if we see sprouting. I don't know. You know, obviously more of a concern if something is cut, like, but yeah, if we do see some sprouting in wheat or rye, yeah, we would see some falling numbers being affected. So that would definitely be a concern.
Okay, and the other question was about barley that was bone dry and it's still standing. Will it sprout standing? And that was the one that I missed you on.
Okay. Yeah, like there's always a concern that it will sprout standing. So, you know, it really just depends how much moisture we got and how quickly it was being shed. So, yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for getting back on there, Ann. Okay, now just a few slides to talk about some of the stuff that's still going on. They extended the application deadline to October 1st for funding to support water source development. So if you still have a project in mind on your farm to help you through either this year or managing for years coming to improve your watering system, this BMP 503 is still available. Contact information is there, whether it's Andrea or Colleen. And then also our Manitoba hay listing service. Definitely, if you got hay for sale or you're looking to buy hay, go to that site. There's lots of information on there. A reminder that the crop residue burning authorization is up and running, and to check the website for burning on a daily basis if you're looking at burning residue. Our ag adaptation specialists in the province, so definitely if you got questions or concerns of something going on, please contact these people and they'll give you a hand wherever they can. Our livestock and forage extension people, our specialists, listed there as well. So if you're looking to do some, especially feed rations, if you're looking at getting those done, definitely contact these people. If you're looking at extending or looking at different feed sources, give these guys a call. They'll help you through planning a ration for your herd. The crop insurance offices, Dennis mentioned earlier on about if you're looking at not harvesting a crop and using it for other purposes, definitely contact them first before you do that. There's the numbers of the offices. There's also our 1-844 number and the 1-833 number for crop insurance. And then once again, the hay listing service. And that's it for this week. So thanks for attending. I think we've cleared up all the questions. So join us next week, September 1st. And hopefully we'll all be back out in the field and harvesting. Thanks for attending.